President Biden unveiled today, in fact, he kicked off the whole thing with a speech that he gave this afternoon. In fact, so he delivered the speech in Pittsburgh, and he went over some of the bigger picture items for his $2.25 trillion spending bill. That's the initial price tag. Of course, it's going to end up costing a lot more than that. And according to Biden, the spending is going to be spread out over 8 years. Now, where did he get 8 years? Well, I guess he assumes he's going to serve 2 terms, right? So he's got 8 years. And so the spending is going to be distributed over the 8 years of the Biden-Harris administration. Hopefully that isn't the case, but in any event, that is the plan. Now, when Biden began talking, of course, he talked about the huge catastrophe that we just went through together as a nation that is still not even over, and that is the war against COVID-19. And he mentioned the 500,000 or so people, I forget the exact number, who died as a result of COVID-19. And he compared this to the number of Americans who had died in previous wars, World War I, World War II or Vietnam. And, this number exceeds those numbers. And the idea was that what we've just been through with COVID is as bad as a world war, which of course it's not. These are not valid comparisons. What we just went through in America in the last year pales in comparison to what Americans went through during the 4 years of the Second World War. To say that we have been through anything even closely resembling a world war or even Vietnam is sheer nonsense. I mean, yes, a lot of people died, but most of these people probably would have died anyway. I'm not trying to be callous, and, there are some people that might still be alive today if they didn't get COVID, but a lot of the people who died of COVID, if they didn't get COVID, they would have died of something else. In fact, who knows what they actually died of? They just blamed it on COVID. All these hospitals have a vested interest in labeling any death a COVID death. They get more money as a result of it. But also, how many of the people who died of COVID were octogenarians? I mean, a lot of people were dying in their 80s. Biden is trying to say that, hey, this is just as bad. In fact, as far as he's concerned, this is even worse because he's just counting the numbers, right? And he's also not looking at the costs, the emotional costs of that war, and the real life costs and the destruction of not only lives, of capital and everything that went into it. So he is just overplaying how bad this was. We have to keep stuff in perspective. And of course, a lot of the problems from COVID were not from the disease itself. A lot of the wounds were self-inflicted. A lot of the problems were because of what the government did, the government's response. I've said from the beginning, the government's cure for COVID, the fiscal and monetary cure, is worse than the actual disease. So the government is responsible for these problems. And now the government is saying it's going to be the one to provide the solutions. But of course, all these government solutions are going to make the problem the government caused much worse. Now, one of the things that Biden stressed during his speech was that there were going to be higher taxes. And I'm going to get into the specific taxes and the specific spending increases when I finish kind of going over what he said. So he said there is going to be higher taxes, but not to punish people, right? He's not interested in punishing people that were successful. All he wants to do is make sure that there are opportunities created for other people. So in other words, he thinks the only way to create opportunities is to take money away from the entrepreneurs who earned it and have the government spend it creating opportunity for other people, which basically is taking a stake to the very heart of capitalism, because the tax hikes that Biden is proposing, and he made clear to mention this, are only aimed at people who earn over $400,000 a year. And of course, corporations are a primary target of these tax increases. So wealthy earners and corporations are going to be taxed so that the government can provide opportunities to other people. Now, this is what Biden and everybody else seems to overlook, that the money that was in the private sector that the government wants to take away, that money also provides opportunities for other people. Because when you're taxing the corporations and you're taxing the rich, right, you're not getting at consumption, you're getting at investments. The money that the rich would have invested in new plant and equipment, in new research and development, in new training, all that money that the private sector would have invested with a profit motive, which is the best way to invest money because you are sure that it is being put to good use, that the capital and the labor and the resources that are being invested productively because the company is able to sell what it creates at a price higher than it costs to create it, which means these resources are being put to good, efficient uses. That's what you want. But what Biden wants to do is he wants to take money out of the private sector that would have created lots of opportunities in the private sector, and he wants to take that money and have the government spend it and have the government create those opportunities. So the opportunities that government is going to create and provide to the public are going to be at the expense of the opportunities that the private sector would have created and provided if it had the resources to do it. But it didn't, because those resources were taken away by government. So the question is, what is better for creating opportunities and economic growth? Is it better when private individuals and private companies invest money on their own with a profit motive? Or is it better to have central planners in government decide how money is going to be spent? Well, obviously, we know the answer. We've seen every single country that has tried to centrally plan its way to prosperity has been a complete and utter failure. The way to have opportunity and economic growth is to have more resources in the hands of the private sector and to limit as best as you can the resources that are consumed by government. So the way to have the most amount of opportunity is to have the least amount of government. What Biden wants to do is grow government, make government bigger, and so by definition, we are going to have fewer opportunities. Opportunities get smaller as government gets bigger. And if you believe that government is the source of prosperity and that government spending creates opportunities and economic growth, well, then you don't believe in capitalism. You believe in socialism. Unfortunately, that's what Biden believes in, and that's what a lot of Americans believe in now. They believe socialism is better than capitalism. They're completely wrong, and they're going to find out just how wrong they are as America becomes a more and more socialist and therefore far less prosperous country. In fact, another ridiculous observation that Biden made, and this is one that he continues to make, he talked about unions, and he talked about how unions built the American middle class. That's a bunch of nonsense. The middle class was here before unions. Unions were built by capitalism, by free markets, by limited government, sound money. That's what built the middle class. No. Unions, labor unions, were part of the destruction of the middle class. The reason the middle class has been hollowed out so much, in part, is because of labor unions and the power that government gave them to wreck every company that they infected. That was the problem.